Adam of the Backpack Theory Podcast. On this episode of the Backpack Theory Podcast, we're going to be having a discussion with Jed Chappell of City Center here in War Acres, Oklahoma. This conversation is going to be based around the impact that City Center is having whenever it comes to children and youth. And we're going to really delve into the effects of childhood abuse, childhood neglect, and how you can take action to actually get involved with being a change in your community, not just being stagnant. And if you have gone through a scenario like that, if you know someone, or if you just want to understand the depth of what we're dealing with nationally right now, whenever it comes to childhood abuse, neglect, and these generational and societal issues, this is a great podcast for you to kind of increase your empathy and understanding of what exactly is going on and how you can be a part of the change. Thanks for tuning in. Enjoy the episode. Hey, it's Adam with Backpack Theory Podcast, where we unpack past experiences to help define a better future. And today, we're going to be unpacking life full circle with my friend, Jed Chappell. Jed is the CEO and founder of City Center in War Acres, Oklahoma. And the purpose of City Center is creating empowered pathways to relief and restoration in our community. Jed, welcome to the podcast.
Man, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
After we met at, that burnt offerings night with Wes Lane, and I got to hear some of your story and just hear your background, I was just so impacted. And I was like, this dude came from that, and now he's doing this, which we'll get a little bit in the podcast, but quite the inspirational story. And I was just so touched by just the impact and just the passion behind what you do. And then you kindly invited me out to go tour the center a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
And, that was just an unbelievable experience. So why don't you tell us a little bit about City Center and tell us about what exactly you're doing right now whenever it comes to the War Acres and Oklahoma community?
Yeah. So they're at City Center. We're in War Acres, and we have about a 10,000 square foot building that we operate out of. We have a food pantry, clothing closet, and after school programming for youth. As a matter of fact, we also have programming for any time there's a break in school hours for young people to come to our facility. We've created a safe space. We feel like that's the main thing. It's a safe space for families and young people, primarily young people, to come to receive our services, to receive for the young people mentorship, guidance, leadership development, anything that they may be lacking and not have access to outside of City Center, we provide there at the center.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the way that you set up. And whenever we were going through, we were talking about, I analyze everything from a psychological and sociological perspective whenever it comes to just kids going through that very fragile state of emotional development and their correlation. I love how you immediately were talking about how you identified everything as the kitchen or the living room or the dining room table. Why don't you tell us a little bit about, the way that you have that set up and that kind of environment and warmth that you have for those children?
We have it set up in such a way that we always say this: we want people to feel like the building is hugging them. We want it to feel like home. We want it to feel warm. And if you walk into our center while our nutrition coordinator is hard at work, it'll smell like dinner in there, or sometimes baked cookies. And so anyway, we just do our very best to try to provide that space and make it feel like it is a warm, welcoming environment.
Yeah, it's so cool, man. It's just so important for kids to have those safe spaces. We live in a state, we live in a country where I feel like, I grew up pretty middle class. I went to a private school. So I think sometimes whenever it comes to individuals, especially like in the Midwest or Bible Belt, sometimes we are not privy to what some kids go through. Why don't you give us an example or a story or an illustration about some of the kids that you have coming in and kind of like some of what you're seeing?
Yeah, sure. So good example is a young man named Austin that he was in our program, has been in our program for quite a while. Within his life, there's a lot of very challenging situations. He has 11 siblings from different fathers. He lives with his mother.
Oh my God.
Helping raise those 11 siblings, primarily operating as the man of the house, and he's only 16 years old. And so many times you can probably imagine with that type of situation, there's a food insecurity that exists. There's a lack of really solid mentorship outside of what we offer him at our center. And so for this young man, he is really, he's a few steps behind in life, obviously. So anyway, he comes to the center, he gets to exist and hang out in our safe space and actually be a kid. There's a little bit of respite there for him while he's at City Center. And so since he's been at City Center, he's been able to really navigate some of his emotions and some of the trauma that he's experienced in his life through mentorship and through some of our programming. But he's a great kid. He's thriving now. He's on the football team, I believe, still at PCO or PC North, and is able to thrive in his life currently.
Yeah, that's unbelievable, man. I love I think it's called parenting. Whenever you have those kids that are younger and they're
Yeah.
having to actually parent their younger siblings because they don't have the capability. And 11 siblings from different parents and not having a father figure. It's remarkable. I mean, that's literally in our backyard. I mean, we've got churches on every single corner whenever you drive through, Oklahoma. And I think sometimes, I mean, myself included, I think that we become very cold and isolated in just the communities that we live in. And we kind of go, that doesn't really affect me. I pay my tax dollars or, I donate to these things, but like how much involvement or like how much awareness that you're actually having. How long has City Center been around?
Center's been open we're working on our 8th year of operation right now. And it's been really exciting to see some young people that have come in at middle school, graduate high school, and otherwise wouldn't have graduated, honestly, man. That's, to give kind of a side note there too, there's been a couple young people that they were dropped off in police cars at our center in middle school and ended up really getting some traction in our programming. And many of them said, man, I didn't expect to live past 18, yet alone graduate, move on to an actual career through Metro Tech or whatever it may have been, and then be actually thriving in their life. So that's pretty wild to think about for you and I. Like, man, they thought this was a thought in a young person in middle school's mind that they wouldn't even be alive at 18, let alone graduating high school and accessing a higher level of education. Isn't that crazy to think about? In our community, in Oklahoma, in the Bible Belt of all places, we have young people that are that far at a disadvantage that they would have those thoughts. It's pretty mind blowing when you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, dude, that's absolutely, I mean, it's unbelievable. Just that goes on. And it's, I mean, I self-admittedly have been in circles before to where we're having discussions and we're always like, well, it's the parents' responsibility or it's the state's responsibility. But what we don't realize a lot of times is just the amount of impact there and like what the parents were exposed to, right? Like it's generational a lot of times. And I mean, just look at poverty statistics, dude, it's crazy. We have 22,000, and this is actually a low estimate. Governor Stitt actually correlated a group of people together to solve this problem because they felt like it was very low. We have 22,438 homeless students in the state of Oklahoma. That is 3.2%, and the national average is 2.2%. So we are more than 33% higher or even 50% higher than what the national average is just in our backyard, and that trickles downhill. Have you ever dealt with those children that come in and they're homeless or they're living in their parents' car?
Yeah, there's a young man that I think of. His name is Jordan. Since he's been there at the center, he and his family have been homeless. Well, and technically he's couch homeless. He's sleeping from place to place, sometimes with his parents, sometimes with friends that he knows. And this young man, I'm very proud to say, he is just an incredible example of overcoming the odds. And so, yeah, we see kids like that every day. We see kids that are in the foster care system. We see kids that are getting ready to age out of the foster care system and what's going to happen to them. I think statistically, I don't know the numbers to date, but the likelihood is very high for those students to either be dead, homeless, or incarcerated within 2 years after being, moving on from the foster care system. So it's just mind boggling to me to think that we have young people, I believe our greatest asset to our communities, the greatest future asset to our communities are our young people. And man, they're struggling out there. They are fighting for their lives. Their eyes are wide open. They're over and underdeveloped. And it's very, very concerning to me. So that's why we're really passionate at City Center to serve young people, because we feel like we need to give them an advantage that they don't currently have in their lives. So
Yeah, I mean, dude, it's so great. Whenever I walked in there and I looked at it and just the, base level, and I'm very passionate and outspoken whenever it comes to childhood
yeah,
abuse and whenever it comes to paying attention to those things and looking for those
yeah.
signals. I mean, you and I both have, I think you've read The Body Keeps Score,
Yes, I have.
correct?
Yeah. It's been a while, but I've read.
Yeah, it's one of the best books I've ever read, especially the chapter where they really delve into childhood abuse. And in that book, they actually talked about the 1995 through 1997 ACE
Mhm.
study that was conducted with 17,000 members that correlated together. And they did real in-depth studies on childhood abuse. And some of the statistics they came up with when it came to just the effects of what is happening whenever it comes to this childhood abuse and neglect is just staggering. I mean, they found out that if we eliminated childhood abuse, which we understand the fact that, you're never going to eliminate it, but if you could just make a dent on it, 50% of alcoholism would be eliminated. 2/3 of suicide would be eliminated. 3/4 of IV injection would be eliminated, and 3/4 of domestic violence. If we would just pay attention to these things, and we're all guilty of it. Like it's remarkable whenever you go into a restaurant or whenever you go into a social environment and you see these kids that are interacting with technology at their fingertips that they're not supposed to be exposed to. Their brains are not developed. I mean, your synaptic
Yeah.
pruning, your neurological processing is still being
Yeah.
developed. Your emotional processing is still being developed. And these kids are getting handed devices with these graphic
Yeah.
images that are just triggering so many different emotions that they're not
Yeah.
prepared to handle because we're misparenting, we're neglecting. And then people want to turn a blind eye to it and go, well, I take great care of my kids. I take care of my little corner, but they don't realize it's more than just your small little
Yeah.
circle. Like it's grander than that, and paying attention to that and actually taking action, which is what you have done based off of what your past experience is, because you actually got a chance to live it, is really just living it in action. And I love the fact that, you are facilitating this environment and raising that awareness. How how do you feel like over the last 8 years, do you feel like there's more awareness? Do you feel like there's less awareness whenever it comes to the different things that you're presenting and the growth that you're
Sure. Yeah.
seeing?
If you spend any time with me whatsoever, you're going to be aware of the fact that we are in crisis. I don't even refer to, I don't like to put labels on people or children or anything like that. But the term at risk is kind of laughable for me now. It's more like we have endangered.
So we have endangered?
Yeah. So we have endangered youth. We have youth that are in danger of not existing. You know what I mean? We are in a crisis mode. So I feel like if you spend any time with me, you're going to be fully aware. And I got it from the rooftops. Any opportunity that I get within the community, within my circles, within other circles that I get to run in. So yeah, I think the awareness has increased, but you're right. A lot of times we like to just kind of crawl in our own little corner and take care of us and ours, and realize, you know what? Here's the thing though. Here's the reality. Many of us are privileged. We're blessed. We have really cool opportunities that have been in front of us, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The reason why that is such a good thing is that I believe we actually have extra capacity to serve and meet these needs that exist with these young people. We have extra levels of capacity to mentor. We have capacity to volunteer. We have capacity to serve. We have capacity to give to this cause. And so I feel like, hey, if we are blessed, if we are privileged, if we have a little extra in the tank, so to speak, man, we should be contributing it to whatever that looks like, the cause to serve and reach young people that are in crisis mode.
Yeah, and it takes initiative, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, dude, like, I'm sure you're familiar with the fentanyl crisis,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Yeah. It's moved into a train
So,
crisis now too. There's more drugs coming in on the scene that are damaging kids.
and I think a lot of like, parents that live in the suburbs and like their kids go to private school, they're like, well, that's not going to affect me. But like you and I were talking about this the other day. No, it's going to affect you. It's going to catch up, especially if you don't talk to your kids about it and you're not proactive and you don't go out there to try to find solutions and you just expect for other people to take care of it. Like I follow this page on Instagram. One of my buddies, dude, really, really great dude, like solid guy. I've known him for years, very successful. And he shared a story about his daughter passing from fentanyl. And her story was on this page called Every 11 Minutes. And it talks about like every 11 minutes, someone's being affected by fentanyl. And it just is very heartbreaking. And I mean, dude, like, I mean, this guy is like a very successful person. His daughter was a very successful individual, but she just fell into the trap because she ended up getting exposed to the wrong thing in the wrong situation. And it's just heartbreaking to see these things transpire and just kind of grow because we live in a society to where there's so much distraction and there's so much access to us. And these kids are not supposed to have
Yeah.
that much access to them at a very young age. I mean, because that's got to be something that you battle is whenever you have kids that are coming in with single parents and that the single parents are giving access to the children to other partners or other people that are coming in. Is that something that you run into?
Yeah, for sure. We've had a few cases where multiple boyfriends have been in the home and at some point or another have abused either the young girl or the young boy in that scenario. And we've had to like tackle that situation as it came at us, which is really hard. It's like, I think that, we can put blame on the mom or the dad or whoever, but the reality is there's a crisis again that our children are underdeveloped and overexposed. And we have a responsibility to guard them and protect them. And if it's not happening, the reality is it's not happening a lot of times in the home, especially with single parent homes. But we have the opportunity. We do have the opportunity to say, you know what, I'm going to insert myself into this crisis, into this scenario, and I'm going to provide a level of mentorship and guidance that will help guard the kids that are placed around me. And so, yeah, we have seen cases like that, unfortunately, and those are heartbreaking cases because that is totally preventable. You don't have to insert a person into a young person's life that isn't actually healthy or who doesn't have their best intentions for that young person. So, yeah, it's a pretty sad deal.
Yeah, it's really, really sad, man. And I mean, you just paying attention and being like present with your children, and then also paying attention to who your kids are hanging out with,
Yeah.
and then also like just pitching in and like genuinely like looking at ways to like foster other people. I mean, that's one of the big things that you guys run on. And I know whenever I talk to you, you were like, one of the big needs we need are role
Yeah.
models and people that want to step in and actually help. Why don't you tell a little bit, like before we jump into your story and the why behind what you do it? Like if someone's listening to this and like it's starting to ring with them that this is a big problem and that we need to wake up, like what is something that you would tell someone they could do to contribute to the cause or take action?
Man, we have a lot of friends all over the city that are doing great things with young people. So I'll start there and say, man, there's great people on the east side doing great work with youth. There are great people on the northwest side, on the south side, all over. So the reality is there's spaces for this type of mentorship to happen. And so you have the ability, if you have a heartbeat and a good intention and the desire to learn even, there's places where you can volunteer to mentor. We have an after school program, like I mentioned, that we need role models, like you're saying. We need healthy people that can just be in relationship with young people. It starts with the relationship. Now, you're not going to walk in day one and be able to speak something into a young person that's probably going to, it's
Yeah.
not even going to stick most likely. The reality is relationship is gritty, it's dirty, it's messy, it's long-term, and you have to be there for the long haul in many situations to see that you can actually gain some influence and equity relationally with young people. But when you do, I'll say when you do, man, they are all ears. When they trust you and they believe that you're real and that you're there to stay, they are all ears and they're desperately seeking guidance and direction. I can promise you that. We've seen that. And our after school program is living proof of that.
Yeah, I think that so many times we get confused, especially in our society today. Like we want instant gratification, like
Yeah.
we're tuned to do that.
Mhm.
And so we go in with these expectations of grandiose, and we don't realize that we just have to go in with a servant attitude. You have to go in with an open attitude
Yeah.
and understand that you actually don't most of the time understand what these kids or what kind of environment that they're living in. And there's no way for you to possibly fully understand that. So stepping into that realm just with an open mind, open heart, and just wanting to listen and be there versus like fix. Because those kids, I mean, are very emotionally up and
Yeah.
down,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Like a lot of their emotional development was done between 1, 5, 8. Your synaptic pruning is done majority by the time you're 10. And so you've got a lot of these preconceived notions as this kid that's very, very fragile that went through
Yeah.
a lot of scenarios that they shouldn't have had to. And so whenever you're stepping in there, being
Yeah.
very conscious of the fact that you're not going to be able to fully understand, but earning their trust through asking questions and being exploratory and just
Yeah.
being genuine is a major part of that, and not having this expectation that you're just going to go in and fix
Yeah.
them. You know, that's why it's mentorship,
Yeah.
right? It's mentorship. Like you're supposed to go in, you're supposed to mentor and spend time.
Yeah.
And there's a commitment there. And sometimes I would argue that, like, you know, we say, well, it's just easier to give money. Money's important,
Yeah.
like for sure. Like if you're listening to this and like you're looking for a good cause and you want to actually fix a lot of the problems in our country, find someone like City Center and donate money if
Yeah.
you have it, because you are contributing to fixing the overall problem in our country. But sometimes the time allotment, your time is your most valuable asset. And sometimes that time is actually more valuable than the dollar for dollar investment. So don't get caught up. I feel like so many times we get caught up in like, well, I don't have anything of value to contribute to this organization, or I can't do anything. No, like you can do something. Just take action and be kind and open up your time, because that ultimately is what ended up landing you here, correct? I mean, because you had a period in time in your life where, you know, you were part of the system somewhat.
Yeah.
I mean, why don't you tell us a little bit about why City Center? Like, why did you get into this?
Yeah.
Like, you know, why is Jed so passionate about what he's doing? And like, you know, what was the moment that basically opened you up a little bit?
Yeah. So my dad passed away when I was 11 years old with cancer, and I remember just being eyes wide open at that point, thinking like, I really want to understand what this life is all about. I remember thinking that at 11 years old, but not having an answer. My older brothers and family, they were really wrapped up in a lot of drugs and alcohol and violence. And so I was exposed to a lot of that stuff, growing up. And so by the time I was 14, I actually started selling drugs for one of her older brothers. And my life took a turn for the worse. From 14 to 18, that's what I did. I ran around, I carried a gun everywhere I went, and I sold drugs and got into a lot of trouble. And I was pretty good at it too. And by the time, so at 18 years old, there was a day that really radically changed my life completely. Some friends came over to my house and they said, Jed, you have a gun and you always carry it with you everywhere you go. We know that. We want to go commit some robberies. And if anybody's home while we're committing these robberies, we want to, by force, tie them up, take everything they've got. And in this process of them asking me, I'm thinking, yes, I'm down for whatever. I really don't care much about my life at this point. I don't have any direction. I'm bitter. I'm angry. I'm resentful, and all kinds of things in my life looking back today. And so I said, yeah, I didn't place much value on myself, or else I wouldn't have made that choice. So from 10 o'clock that morning till 3 o'clock that afternoon, we went from house to house, just robbing people and doing different things that were just unspeakable, honestly. And I'm not proud of any of it. Doesn't define me today, but it does explain me. And so finally, thankfully nobody was ever home. We didn't hurt anybody physically, but we did hurt people emotionally. Obviously, when you come home to a house that's been broken into and your things have been stolen, that's traumatic. So I don't minimize it by any stretch, but we decided to hit one last house at 3 o'clock that afternoon. And we're inside. As we're inside this house, we look out the window, there's a police officer pulling the girl that's driving the getaway car out of her car into his cruiser. Me and my friends inside the house, we panic, break out a window, and take off running through a neighborhood. And before I realized it, I'm in front with the gun in my hand of my friends, and an undercover police officer jumps out of his vehicle, draws his weapon about 20 feet from me, and says, "Drop your weapon or I'm going to shoot." And I, with a wired reaction, say, "No, you drop your weapon. I'm going to shoot," which is obviously the wrong move. Before I could squeeze the trigger, he shot me 4 times in my chest, arm, and twice in my hand. Lost 65% of my blood supply, flatlined in the ambulance for 20 seconds, and I realized, man, I'm gonna die. And I literally did for 20 seconds. Woke up, handcuffed to a bed in ICU, Baptist Medical Center, and my life was never the same from that point on. And so, yeah, so that was the life I was living as a young person. The young people that we serve today at City Center, man, I've lived that life. I understand what it's like to feel like you have no positive direction or moral compass in your life, and you're just down for whatever. And I remember after my father passed, man, there's mentors out there. There's positive mentors and there's negative mentors. The streets can mentor you, or somebody that has good intentions for your life can mentor you. Well, I chose the mentors that taught me how to weigh drugs out, how to divide them up, how to sell them, how to balance my cash and my street profit and loss sheet. I had that mentor. I didn't have a positive mentor. And so today I'm so passionate about what we do at City Center because, man, I really believe that if we provide safe spaces for young people where they can access resources that otherwise weren't accessible in their life, then, man, one of those being mentor, the primary one being mentorship, man, the game will absolutely change for them. And guess what else changes? Our community changes. One thing that one of the police officers in our community shared with us is that they felt like crime and vandalism had decreased by 10% since we had been there serving young people. That's crazy. Just showing up, providing a positive, safe space for young people to come to has changed the game for some of those young people. And I can say that for my life. I wish if I would have had something like this, maybe my life wouldn't have gone in that direction, but it did. However, I don't regret it because it made me passionate about what we're doing today. And so to wrap up that story, I ended up getting sentenced to 47 years in prison as a young person, not knowing what in the world that looked like. Miraculously, I only did 8 years in prison because of good behavior. Got out, and the rest is history. And my life has been different ever since.
Dude, it's an unbelievable story. Okay, so it's crazy. Jed, I grew up in I was homeschooled my entire life, 2-parent household, very different from
Yeah.
Still ended up in jail. And it's remarkable whenever you hear these stories, people that overcame their circumstances and used what could seem like a crutch or a holdback, or I'm not worthy of, or God doesn't have a plan for my life,
Yeah.
or there's no way that anybody could ever accept me. And there's this freeing reality that is scientifically proven whenever you choose vulnerability and you choose to be your true self, you choose to tell your true story and allow your ego to die and to allow that information, that genuine story to be conveyed to others. People connect with that. And in society today, we really don't have that as much because everybody wants to put on the perfect face and everybody wants to act like everything's okay. And by doing that, we just end up masking the issue. And I think that's one really big problem that we have. And that's one of the things that, I feel like organizations like yours is doing is it's actually bringing all of that nastiness of society to light so we can actually bring light to the darkness, right? And so I love the fact that you were so transparent with sharing your story, and you were so transparent whenever it came to your explanation and whenever went to jail. I do have a question for you. What was do you remember any of your flatline experience at all?
I don't remember anything, and that's a good question. I normally I'll share that too. I remember seeing black. That's all I saw. I don't have any white light story, nothing like that. It was just I was gone and then I came back. And I remember being terrified that I was revived. I remember
Wow.
being terrified, and I remember just a lot of beeping and noise in the ambulance as they were fighting to save my life. So I'm not sure what that means. I just know that there wasn't anything hopeful on the other side of what I was experiencing.
Dude, it's crazy. So I've had a couple people on the podcast. I've had a couple people that have had near death experiences or death experiences and have had different stories. I mean, myself when I was 8,
Mhm,
flatlined whenever I had double
mhm,
pneumonia, and they had the ambulance was on its way. I flatlined, I went under, and I still have dreams about that experience. I felt myself elevate out of my body, go over my body, and kind of float, into the sky. And I felt this warmth and everything. But at that time, I knew where I was going, and I had a relationship with God from a very young age because how it was instilled. But it's so interesting depending on where you're at in life and when that happens, what that feeling is. And so by what you're telling me, you use that feeling, that bleakness, that not knowing where you were going to correlate into doing something better. Now, whenever you ended up getting sentenced, what was it like spending that time in prison? Like, what was that like? Like, what was that development process like as a young man?
yeah, so that's a great question too. One of the things that I really attached myself to early because I had out of that experience after I was sentenced, I had my personal encounter with God, and it was very real, very powerful, very relational encounter. And from that point on, I felt like I had a tremendous purpose in my life. And so when I got to my first prison yard, I remember being scared to death. I mean, I'm this time now I'm 19 years old in a man's prison, high level, high medium security, double fence, razor
Mm.
wire, open dorm. So like, anybody you're accessible to anybody in this open dorm setting. And I remember getting shipped to that prison yard in the middle of the night, and I'm in a jumpsuit laying on the top bunk, first day in prison, scared to death. And so what I can say about that experience from that point moving forward though is God placed incredible mentors in my life right there in prison in the same clothing that I was wearing, prison blues. And so I found a positive mentor in there, multiple positive mentors that helped me, just understand what does it mean to be a man? What does that mean? What does it mean to be responsible? What does it mean to have integrity? What does it mean to make the next right decision? And so that's what my prison experience was like. Now, prison is prison, and so I also saw a lot of really, really ugly things happen to people in prison. By God's grace, nothing bad ever happened to me, but I saw a lot of people that were getting involved in the wrong things that prison has to offer get, get harmed in some pretty, significant ways. But by God's grace, I was able to latch on to some positive role models and really navigate my way through the prison system in such a way that I actually got out on good behavior after 8 years.
Yeah, that's remarkable, dude. I think it's remarkable because for a couple of different reasons. Number one, as I stated earlier, a lot of your synaptic pruning is completed by age 10 to 18 and a lot of your emotional development, but you didn't have a strong father figure. Your strong father figures were people that were involved in negative activities. And then you go to prison of all places, and then you start having these positive role models in your life. And, that neuroelastic state of, especially males and females develop until they're 26, males develop until they're 28. But the fact that you were able to really start connecting some of those positive attributes with maybe some of those dormant neurons that were not connected to who you were, and start reinforcing those positive neuropathways and start understanding who you could be, what the potential was based off of these role models in a very bizarre situation like prison. And then you were able to take that same concept and then utilize that in what you're doing now whenever it comes to you speaking to being able to actually understand the importance of a healthy mentor from the perspective of someone that was that emotionally damaged and traumatized is just a truly fantastic testament to what can transpire if the right influence, if you do surround yourself in the right environment, and how different environments and, nature versus nurture argument, but like that nurturing environment can really facilitate an environment for growth. And you are like a living testament to that. And that is just truly unbelievable. Because I think statistically, like if you go to prison once for a long period of time, it's like 3 out of 4 people end up going back to prison. I mean, it's a pretty staggering. Yeah, it's a very high percentage. And so you ended up getting out in 8 years. When did what did that look like post prison? Like, did you have an identity crisis? Like, what did that look like for you?
No, I just started walking through the next door of opportunity that was offered through a relationship that I had with positive people in my life. And so God placed some people in my life that were very solid people throughout it that got me my first job. I never applied for one job. I still haven't applied for a job since I've been out of prison. I've gotten jobs through relationships, very good, solid relationships with good people. And so one opportunity would lead to the next, that would lead to the next. And, there was one situation where it was pretty interesting. My first volunteer opportunity came when I was attending a church. I had been out of prison for 2 weeks, and I was attending this church. Nobody knew anything about me yet. And the youth pastor came up to me one day after I'd been there, and he was like, "Man, you seem like you'd be a great youth volunteer. Like, man, you need to run a solid background check before you do anything, because I got a story I need to tell you." And what's funny is that church was right across the street from our center, and their youth building was the center that we currently operate out of right now. And so after I told him my story, he was very much so at peace and said, "You know what? I feel like we need guys like you to speak into the hearts and the minds of the young people that are in this community." So we love that as a volunteer. So the first place I volunteered, now bring things full circle, is now the building that we own and serve thousands of young people every year. And so that was part of my experience. That thing led to another, which led me to become a pastor at that same church, overseeing the outreach ministry, which we were truly an outreach ministry where we would go into places that had zero ROI to offer. We would go into communities that were desperately in need of mentorship for young people specifically, and we would set up mentorship programs for young people at low-income housing communities that were greatly in need. The schools that these kids would go to in these communities were most of the time 100% free or reduced lunch, which is a very key indicator of poverty in that community. And so, yeah, I don't even think that I felt like I should or could be doing something like that at the time, but it was just the door that I walked through. It was the opportunity that I walked through, and by God's grace, I had solid people in my life showing me like, "Yeah, Jed, you should move forward in that direction. Yeah, that's a good call for you. Yeah, hey, I got a good compass. Because of my personal life, I think this is a good direction that you should go in." So I'm very grateful for the people that I had in my life that nudged me in that direction. And I'm very grateful also for just the opportunities that came my way. So.
Dude, I love that. You said a couple things I'm going to touch on. I mean, number one, I love the fact that you lead your life shamelessly in a sense. I mean, all of us have moments, right, where our ego ends up basically saying, well, you can't say that or can't say this. But the way that you stated, someone approached you and said, "Hey, you should really do this." And you're like, "You should hear my story first." Like, before you decide that, like, that's a pretty cool way of approaching that, and just being like, "Hey, listen, like, I'm going to go shame forward instead of shame in the background and hope that I don't get caught whenever it comes to this." Like, I love that you live so brashly. And, I'm a strong believer that transparency breeds transparency in all forms of life. And we live in a society with this dichotomy of individualism / perfectionism / a tinge of narcissism that is built into this ethos that is the United States, or what the United States has become, not what it was based in. There's a large difference from a societal preference standpoint.
Yeah.
But, we live in this environment where people want to project that so much that they feel like if they have insecurities or they have problems or they have struggles, or maybe they grew up and they were abused in their childhood, they don't want to talk about it because of the shame-based narrative. And I'm a big champion of people that want to do that. And so I really appreciate the fact that you're championing that. And then you're taking what could potentially be shame and you're channeling that into facilitating this environment so that other kids don't have to live through that. I mean, that's unbelievable, because I was looking through poverty statistics just in Oklahoma. And I mean, I think a lot of people are like, dude, we're in Oklahoma. How bad could it be? I mean, yes, there's a lot of economic reasons why Oklahoma is a great place to live. But according to a 2023 Ann E. Casey Foundation study, 21% of children live in poverty in Oklahoma. And just to tell you what poverty is, everybody's like, subjective. Poverty is $29,678 for a family of 4. I mean, that's not that much money to live on with current inflation rate. That's not a lot of money. I mean, and if you think that's a lot of money, or you're like, well, they were going to be fine on it. No, yes.
No, I'm with you.
Like, that's not a lot of money to live on. And that lands us is the 46th ranked child well-being state in economic, education, and health and family. I mean, we're ranked 46th. Yes. And I mean, a lot of people don't see that directly in their society or directly in their direct community because they don't go look for it. Like, they're not interested in it. And so the fact that you're bringing that to the forefront, I just love the fact that you're taking what some people would look as like these imperfections or shame-based modules, and they would have hidden those things. And I love that you're just doing that forward, which has led you to how long ago, and how did you actually come to establishing this organization?
Yeah. So it's the paperwork began in November of 2016. And so I was a pastor on staff at a church here in Oklahoma City for about 8 years, moved away to another state briefly for about 1.5 years to help a friend in Minnesota with the church plan. But as I was up in Minnesota, their statistics aren't near as bad as ours. And I would still see within my Facebook and Instagram feed all these different things that were happening in my city, in Oklahoma City, seeing how poverty was increasing, homelessness was increasing, homeless youth were increasing. A lack of mentorship for young people was about what it was when I left. And I thought, man, this is crazy. I've always had this deep passion for Oklahoma City. I'm just an Oklahoma City guy, at my roots. And so I reached out to a friend who was the lead pastor of a church, and he was like, I was just like, hey man, are there any opportunities in the nonprofit sector that you're aware of? And he said, well, what are you thinking? And so long story short, he offered me a building at a low rent cost and said, what if I gave you this building and for you to launch the idea, the dream that you've always had to have a resource center for families and youth? I said, done deal. And 2 weeks later, I was on the road back to Oklahoma City, ready to launch this initiative. So we started the paperwork in 2016. We opened our doors officially in February of 2017. And from that point on, we were off and running.
That's incredible, dude. That's incredible. And you're all privately funded, correct?
Yes, we are privately funded. We have foundations, corporations, churches, individuals, you name it, but it's all private funding.
That's crazy, dude. While you're going through that, I was actually very intrigued on the health part of it, whenever it comes to what you're doing, whenever it comes to your kitchen and the way that you've integrated that. And I meant to look this statistic up earlier, but in Oklahoma on a 2023 study, 32.3% of children ages 10 to 17 are considered obese in the state of Oklahoma. And so I think that, like, in education standpoint, I mean, it's like we're like 40% of adults are obese as well. Like, there's a lot of facets whenever it comes to just this childhood issue that we have based off of what exactly we're conveying. I mean, how many kids do you have that come in that actually have any idea whenever it comes to what a proper meal should look like?
Oh man, it's funny. We in the beginning, a lot of our kids would see what we were serving, which was healthy food. It was vegetables. It was, nutrient dense meats, things like that were on their plate. And they were like, what is this? Like they're wanting a bag of chips, and they're wanting a Twinkie, and they're wanting things like that because it's quick. It's, it's salty. It's got all this stuff that's not good for you. But so I would say the majority of our kids had no clue what a healthy, well-balanced meal should look like. And so it's really fun. Like, even there was a good example. Our nutrition coordinator made some banana nut bread, and the kids were like, what in the world is this? What is it? And they ate it, and they were like, oh, this is awesome, And so just the reality that good, healthy food makes you actually feel better too. And so we also saw a decline in some depressive moods and things like that with some of our kids after they had been on a healthy diet in our center. Their mood had changed, their attitudes have changed, the lack of obedience shifted to more of a obedient mindset, as far as wanting to obey the rules and be a part of a community that was trying to move in the same direction. So yeah, we feel like, to answer your question, yeah, we see a lot of kids that have no clue what a healthy meal should look like. But because when they're exposed to it and they buy into it, man, it changes so many aspects of their personality and their mood. So
Dude, I've got so many thoughts in relation to that. Number one, the fact that you have this environment to where they're sitting around a family table,
Yeah.
breaking bread together. I had Ben Fuller on my podcast. He's a Christian music artist, and he was talking about how he ended up coming back to God was over a meal. So it was like, having a meal was like what we unpacked. And it's remarkable whenever it comes to just the power and impact of just sitting around as a community and having a meal. So many times we're isolated whenever we're having food. And so therefore we connect from a neurological perspective, our diet with isolation. So like, even though we're at a nice restaurant or whatever, like it's very isolated, and we don't realize that the majority of our diets are very sugar or carb-based diets, which spikes our blood sugar, which is one of the reasons that I brought up the childhood obesity rate. Is a lot of times like the snacks that are provided to kids in public school settings, it's like, well, yeah, they get given meals, but you don't realize the meals that they're given
empty
are
calories.
really high in caloric and sodium. And so therefore their depression rate is higher because they have higher cortisol levels and they have higher blood pressure. And by putting them on a healthy diet, I love the fact that you're seeing a correlation between a healthy diet, which is going to lower blood pressure and should increase oxytocin, because oxytocin is released whenever you're in a community state where people are conversating and you feel understood and everything over a meal. I love that you're seeing a decrease in depressive states, because that is very scientifically backed and something that I love championing. I had a nutritionist, she's a functional practitioner named Kelsey Kaler, and she came on and she was on Dr. Phil actually a few years ago. And she was the argument side of like against the body matters movement or whatever, or the body positive movement, where you can eat whatever you want and it doesn't really matter. And we went over statistics whenever it came to just dietitian like standpoints and like how we were in a large deficit. And so just that educational factor that you're giving to these children to really prepare them. And it's not just about affecting those kids. It's making a generational change in a community by educating them. And I mean, then like, do you ever have kids that start coming and then their little siblings start coming?
Yeah, we have to, we cut off from middle school to high school, but at appropriate times when it's not programming time, their younger siblings will come, and they'll definitely always come to our big community events that we have. I just feel like, yeah, you're right. It's a generational effect that we're having on young people. It doesn't just affect that student that comes to our programming, but it trickles down to their younger siblings. So that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, and that'll end up affecting everybody. I mean, that literally affects our entire country. I'm not going to get too much on the political hot seat, but I am a big person whenever it comes to people blaming the system or people blaming politics or blaming this. It's like, dude, if you don't like what you see, take action. If you don't like what someone else is doing, maybe try to increase your theory of mind and understand why they're doing what they're doing. Maybe look at what background they came from. Be the change. Don't just talk about the change. Be the change. Engage. Go and get involved with something like, City Center, to where you can go be a role model and actually do that. And then if you have kids, involve your kids in it. Let your kids see and have empathy so that it passes down towards them. And then that's going to affect how their kids perceive other people that might have started off at a little bit of a deficit compared to you. And what ages do you take at City Center? Like, when does that program start?
Middle school to high school. So we try to focus on those ages, just because when you mix in elementary school kids with middle school, high school, it becomes a little bit challenging, and we don't have the staff to oversee all ages like that. So middle school to high school, we love middle schoolers because, man, their worldview is still being formed, is we can influence that in a positive way. And so we feel like that we have a great impact there and with the high schoolers.
I love that. Hey, Jed, real quick, before we wrap up the podcast, we got about 10 minutes left. If someone is listening to this, they connected, they really want to get involved. Like, why don't you tell us about some opportunities or what someone would do if they wanted to learn a little bit more about what you're doing or some other organizations are doing in the local circle, or living a life full circle matters? What would that be and what would you say?
Living a life full circle really matters because sometimes we experience pain in our life and it's just that we experience the pain and we never go further. But I believe God wants to bring us full circle. When we submit our pain to Him, He can leverage that to be used in a way that can impact others. I always say this: someday the hurt we've experienced will help heal others. And so that's the full circle for me. I've experienced pain, I've walked through life, and I come back full circle to the people that have experienced the same thing I experienced. But now I'm empowered by that pain to help give somebody a pathway to relief and restoration.
I love that, dude. That's so good. And it's so true. I've seen it in my life. If on this podcast, every person that's come through has gone through some kind of hardships and different degree of difficulty. I will say this: if you're someone that's listening to the podcast and you're like, wow, I don't have any story, or like my story is not nearly as exciting as that, like, don't ever question the validity of what you've gone through and your emotions and how that could impact others. So, your story can always, no matter how insignificant it might seem, it'll always connect with someone. So don't ever be afraid of sharing whatever your insecurity or imperfection may be. So, Jed, dude, I
Thanks,
love you,
man.
man. Thank you for
You
coming
too,
on the
man.
podcast. I really, really appreciate it. I love what you're doing. And, thank you. Just keep on in that passion, that vision.
Thanks,
And
man.
yeah, very welcome. Well, it's
Yeah.
Adam's Backpack Theory podcast. Until next
Yeah.
time, we'll see you. Thank you.
See ya. Thank you.
So what'd you think, Jed?
Yeah, I think if you really are interested in making a difference, like you're talking about, I love what you talked about when it comes to having a meal at a table. I heard from a really wise friend of mine. He said, cities are transformed at tables, not platforms. And we can have some tremendous impact. And so if you want to get involved and sit at a table with a young person, we're one of those places, okcitycenter.org. You can go to the volunteer tab, click on that, sign up to volunteer. We have a lot of friends in the community. You can reach out to us and ask us about other organizations on different sides of town. But there are some reputable, good organizations that you can go to serve. And we would love to have you at City Center.
I love that, man. And you have a gala that you do every year as well. That it's like one of your really big fundraisers. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
So Thursday, October 3rd is our annual gala. And we actually have shifted venues from the Jones Assembly to City and State. It's a ton of fun. It's like a high-end date, and that's what I call it. It's not a stuffy black tie event. It's a lot of fun. And so we love bringing our friends out to come and celebrate the stories that we have at City Center. We call it actually Stories from the Center. And we tell stories. They'll tell stories about young people, about volunteers, about people that are making an impact and getting an impact had on them at our center. So yeah, we'd love to have anybody that wants to be a part of that come.
I love that, man. And we'll add all those links, especially whenever it comes to donations. And I know as well, will you talk real quick? I know that you do these walkthroughs whenever it comes to the center as well. Why don't you tell us a little bit about those walkthroughs or how someone could schedule for one of those walkthroughs?
You can email us at info@okcitycenter.org. That's info@okcitycenter.org. And you can let us know you want to come take a story tour is what we call those. And what we do is we have video screens placed throughout our building, and I'll walk you through the entire building and then play videos of things that have happened in those spaces, lives that have been changed in those spaces. And it's pretty impactful, and you'll get a good idea of who we are and what we do.
I love that, Jed. So in summary, hey, dude, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. I am from personal I'm blessed enough to where I didn't go through, a childhood abuse scenario or anything to that effect, like by the grace of God. But I have a lot of friends that are here with us. I have friends that are not here with us anymore. I've, personally had relationships where I've seen the impact of that and just raising the awareness, talking up. And then also, like, if you're someone that has gone through that as a child and you feel like you have shame or you feel like that holds you back from being yourself, don't allow your imperfections, your fear, and things that were out of your control narrate the impact that you can have on God's kingdom whenever it comes to sharing your story and being open, because there is healing in transparency.
Absolutely.
There is power in transparency. And by you sharing your story, you are going to raise awareness of other people around you that also might feel that way. And that's where those generational curses start breaking, and just be a part of the change. Don't just be a part of whining about the problem and hoping that it will change.
Good.
In summary of this podcast, I always ask all of my guests a couple different questions. Number one, if there was a book that you would recommend for someone to read, what would that book be and why?
Honestly, we've talked about it a little bit, but this was the book that actually changed things for me in how I viewed what I experienced in my past. And it's The Body Keeps the Score. I think I would encourage anyone to read that. I mean, maybe you haven't experienced trauma or abuse or anything like that, but maybe someone you know has, maybe someone you're supposed to mentor has, and having an understanding of what trauma does to your body is a great thing to have an understanding of, because trauma, it connects to so many different things, and it's just a wealth of knowledge, honestly, on the topic. So
yeah, I also love the fact that it touches a lot on PTSD and a lot of mental health things outside of even trauma. And the effects of like functional tools that you can incorporate in your life, like HRV regulation and exercise and diet, and how all those can really fix into it. So I agree. I mean, I would prefer, I did not go through it, but I read it intentionally because I knew some people that went through it, and it really increased my theory of mind and understanding. So I love that book, and I love that suggestion. The second question I ask, if there's one person in your life that has inspired you or impacted you, who would that person be and why?
there was a guy named Mario in prison that when I was incarcerated, he was just a solid, godly guy. And he pulled me up early and taught me what to avoid, what to focus on while I was incarcerated. But more than anything else, he really helped me understand what it looked like to be a man, and in a healthy way, And so I would say Mario is a big influence in my life that I'll forever be grateful for.
I love that, dude. That's a first for me. That's the first for me. Whenever it comes to inspiration from a dude that was met in prison, but God can literally speak to any of us at any place at any time. So I think that's beautiful, dude. So I ask everybody to do this in 60 seconds. If you were going to talk to someone that's listening to this, and maybe they've gone through a lot in life, or maybe they've experienced a lot, if you were going to tell someone why life full circle, or living a life full circle, matters, what would that be and what would you say?
Living a life full circle really matters because sometimes we experience pain in our life and it's just that we experience the pain and we never go further. But I believe God wants to bring us full circle. When we submit our pain to Him, He can leverage that to be used in a way that can impact others. I always say this: someday the hurt we've experienced will help heal others. And so that's the full circle for me. I've experienced pain, I've walked through life, and I come back full circle to the people that have experienced the same thing I experienced. But now I'm empowered by that pain to help give somebody a pathway to relief and restoration.
I love that, dude. That's so good. And it's so true. I've seen it in my life. If on this podcast, every person that's come through has gone through some kind of hardships and different degree of difficulty. I will say this: if you're someone that's listening to the podcast and you're like, wow, I don't have any story, or like my story is not nearly as exciting as that, like, don't ever question the validity of what you've gone through and your emotions and how that could impact others. So, your story can always, no matter how insignificant it might seem, it'll always connect with someone. So don't ever be afraid of sharing whatever your insecurity or imperfection may be. So, Jed, dude, I love you, man. Thank you for coming on the podcast. I really, really appreciate it. I love what you're doing. And, Thank you. Just keep on in that passion, that vision.